Hello there, welcome back to my channel to both new and old modelling friends. Yes, it's time to finish this little beauty of a kit. Tamiya's 148 scale Heinkel 162, the Volksjager. In this final video of the series, I'm going to show you how I modified the kit to wheels up in flight, how I easily painted a natural wood effect using oils, and how to combine metal effects and weathering to show off this late war last ditch fighter. So grab a coffee, sit back and let's go.
So here it is, we've jumped ahead quite a bit. The Volksjager is all primed up in Stynylrez yellow, and I'll tell you why I use yellow in just a minute. There's the engine just sitting up the top there. It's not fully closed in, like I said in the last video. You've got to press it in like that. For the purpose of this first little bit, I'm going to tell you about how I converted it to wheels up. Okay, now you can see that all the parts, there's a single seam line going all the way down the middle. That's very easy to fill. I think I've done an okay job. There might be a ghost seam here or there that I might have to refill soon, and I've had some of my primer left off just there as well. Unfortunately, the middle piece here, that the main gear door base, thankfully they give you two, it's actually quite fragile. So I've had to glue that in. I thought I could do that separately. But what I've done, as you can see, I've got a small hole here, a gym hole as I like to call it. And all that is inside there I've placed a piece of styrene rod, a styrene tube I should say actually, that's the diameter of the rod that I'm going to use to hold it up. And it's just glued in place. Sometimes I use a bit of epoxy. In this case I just use normal glue. There was enough meat of plastic in there to get it there, but it's getting the angles right, because what I've done is I found for the base, I found a ship model base from, I think it's a Trumpeter 1700 kit, and all I've done is decided on the angle that I wanted using some 3mm carbon fibre. This is extremely strong. Okay, and I've drilled a hole through there at an angle so that it would be at a nice jaunty angle like that, and underneath that's epoxy resin. I've just put another tube, same diameter as the tube inside the aircraft, and I've just used a little bit of styrene block here to get it around these reinforcement spots. This is where you actually drill the holes for your posts for your ship model. And I've just made up a little bit of epoxy, two-part epoxy putty, and just sealed that all in so it's nice and stable. So we just put the carbon fibre rod in there, like so, and place it in there, and it's flying. So what I'll do is I'll paint this whole base nice black so you get a nice contrast, and then we'll move on to paint the actual aircraft itself.
So it's on with getting the natural wood effects layers on first. I chose 3 different wood tones from Tamiya's XF range. The exact ones aren't important, as long as they differ somewhat in tonal value. I sprayed the lightest colour first, roughly outlining a pattern on each wing, and then masking off in between each colour. Now there's not many reference photos to show how the Heinkel's wings were arranged, as they're made out of wood, so this pattern is half artistic, I guess you could say, half sort of real. You could just use one colour, but I thought this looks a bit better. I also painted the ailerons in different colours on both sides of the wing, but I left the main underside in the original yellow Stynylrez colour. With the last darkest colour filling up the remainder, I can take off the masking tape and let's have a look at the result. Okay, I did need to take the tape off, since I don't want to cover it with the gloss black needed for the metal effects, but it looks nice, doesn't it? Time to put the metal down. First you need to put a gloss black layer. I used Tamiya X1, and and slowly with light coats cover the remainder of the aircraft in preparation for a shiny metal finish. Shiny is the key to a good metal coat. I used MRP aluminium for the main coat with very light layers at low PSI, while I added some of the new AK Extreme metal in a mottled fashion to break it up a little bit. I also used MRP titanium on some other parts, but in the end it wasn't necessary.
With the masking tape taken off, you can see the pattern on the wings, you can see the nice shiny metal. Okay, I need to dull all this down, so I'm going to give this a flat coat next because this is far too shiny. I accidentally oversprayed the elevators here, so I repainted them in two different wood colours. If I just flip this over, there we are. The gear doors are painted, and also these parts here. And I've left the underside of the wings just a basic wood colour because I'm actually going to paint almost all of this in light blue. And then if we go to the nose, I didn't manage to film this, but I've painted the nose a basic white, greyish white off primer, because that actually was wood, but the reference photo I've got, it was covered over with a very basic primer. So, next stage, just a little bit more painting here underneath where the engine nacelle goes. I just need to paint those bits, and I might give it a flat coat, because that's a little bit too shiny. It's a beautiful effect, but it's too shiny for what these were. These were made out of really dodgy sheet metal, aluminium. It was not the best quality, so let's go with that next.
Again, my paint of choice is MRP, this time the RLM green colours straight over the metal effect. I also sprayed the rudder tips in a slightly darker tone. More masking tape. I've masked off the front of the engine to seal the metal effect, and then pre-shaded the panel lines to represent the putty that was placed on everywhere. For this mix I used Tamiya XF27, XF83 and a dull mix, although I reckon I could have gone a bit darker here. After the pre-shading, I'll next paint the areas in between with a thin mix of RLM 81, again using MRP. I just love the way MRP sprays. It's an almost ink-like consistency, very easy to apply slowly and get the effect you want. Next, I pre-shaded the black nozzle with some hull red, and then a combo of NATO black and green black.
So now it's time to paint the putty lines that cover up all the sheet metal aluminium on the sides there. They filled these in with a sort of a putty, like an RLM2 putty. So the way I've done that is got some life color paints, and that's RLM2, but I've lightened it quite a lot with a light gold grey, and just thinned it a little bit with some water here. Okay, to a nice consistency, so I can do light coats. And I've done this side, as you can see, all the way underneath. Just apply with a brush. I gave this a flat coat so the paint would adhere a little bit better. So let's flip it over and do the other side. So I start by going around all the panel.
The key to applying this mix is to use thin coats and take your time to build it up. All the reference photos show a lot of variation in the putty. Remember, these aircraft were built with slave labour and not done to a very high standard. So don't be too concerned that your painting needs to be top notch. I did this even without a magnifier, just freehand. Now time for the fun bit, the oils. I used a very light coat of burnt sienna and painted all the pre-coloured wood panels after masking to make sure of no overspray. The key here is a very light coat, a filter almost. After this was applied, I simply used a sponge to scrub off most of the oil, and then I let it dry overnight. The next stage is more tricky. This time, using a variety of worn flat brushes, I painted on a relatively thick layer of different coloured oils. Which ones you use are up to you, but the idea of course is to change up your colour choice to represent the different woods. Notice I go back and forth to modulate the amount of oil and to create grain with the brush stroke. The final brush I use is a wisp, and that helps define the wood grain even more as you drag it through the oils. Now I move to the top side and use the same process with the plywood part behind the cockpit before moving on to the wings. The tricky bit with a cross pattern on the wings is making sure your brush strokes go with the grain, pardon the pun. Again, I'm using that wisp brush to get the final wood grain pattern. You could use a very old flat brush for a similar effect. So here's one wing done with the final oil. Compared to the other with only the burnt sienna filter. Moving on to the markings. I sprayed under the wings with the basic blue RLM mix, and then I made some masks from tape for the crosses, spraying NATO black. The next stage after letting the oils dry overnight was some panel line washes. I like to use thin Tamiya enamel wash, the dark brown one, applied with a liner brush, like a pin wash. I tried not to go overboard on the fuselage washes, but they needed a bit more definition. I added a final wash to the engine nacelle as well. Last thing, spray the trim tabs with some red, and I think it's all done. Thank you for watching. I hope you really enjoyed this build as much as I did. If you liked the video, leave a like or a comment about what you think worked or didn't work. I'm going to try to keep to this fortnightly schedule, so please subscribe so you don't miss the next video. Thanks again, and I'll see you on the next one. Just stay tuned for some bloopers.
Bit wobbly, bit too bright. I'm going to cancel that. Is that in focus? That's not in focus. XF83, which I'll use mainly this for the lower hull. Lower hull? Lower fuselage. It's not a ship, Chris, it's a jet.
Oh, last thing, spray the trim, no, start that again. Last thing, spray the trim tabs, try that again.
Edit that bit out.